Hi there. Now I'm supposed to stay within somewhat range of this microphone, and if you know me, you'll know that drives me crazy. So if I get too far away from the mic, let me know to go back. I have no problems with that. And I better go into this because right now I have like an hour presentation to give in a half hour, and then also I'm incredibly jet lagged. And just for the sake of argument, I'm American, so if I say anything stupid, I've got two good reasons. And then, let's see. So anyway, let me go into the presentation. So one day I was sitting around, so I wrote a book, Advanced Persistent Security. It's awesome, buy it. And so anyway, the way this came about, the reason I mentioned that was, my co-author, Ari, her name's Araceli, goes by Ari. We were sitting around one day, and what happened was, it comes on the news like there was this major break-in at some university, and then they have like Mandian come out, or Kevin Mandia comes out and says it was a sophisticated attack, and then the FBI comes out after him in this news conference, and they say, yes, it was a sophisticated attack. Then they go in, it's like, well, the details are they had a phishing message which, basically planted malware of this sort. And I'm like, wait, phishing message? That's not a sophisticated attack. And it's like, wait a second, malware? That's known malware. That's not a sophisticated attack. I'm like, what the hell makes a sophisticated attack? And it's like, well, nothing really makes a sophisticated attack because there was no definition of what is a sophisticated attack. So if you want to call something sophisticated, just go ahead and do it. No, there's no rules against it. So anyway, if you can't tell, I go on my rants, and that's the way my presentations come about. And what happened was, so then I wrote up a bunch of rules with Ari. We call them the IRARI rules of IRARI rules of sophisticated attacks, and published it in Computer World. And then Kim Zetter from Wired Magazine retweeted it out, so that blessed it, so it's official. And we have rules of what are sophisticated attacks. And anyway, so, then I'm like sitting there thinking, it's like, this is really important. Why is this such a factor? And why can't we just stop these nice, simple attacks? So anyway, I'm going to go through a lot of the, a few attacks. Again, time constraints, we'll see how well I do. But, and then we'll talk about, so why does it matter if somebody calls something a sophisticated attack? It kind of does. I mean, it destroys the focus. So for example, how many people remember the Sony hack? Made international news, and everybody was like, oh, it's a North Korea, it's a sophisticated attack. I'm like, why is it a sophisticated attack? They sent a phishing message to an admin. I'm like, that's not sophisticated. They got a footprint on the network. They had a flat network. They were able to go around the network at will. They put known malware on the network that destroyed the network, so it was widely known malware, not sophisticated. They downloaded terabytes worth of movies. And why was that sophisticated? I mean, there were just simple failures again and again and again, but everybody was like, it's North Korea. We can't blame them. They're a sophisticated attacker. I'm like, yeah, you can blame them. And then the argument wasn't, why were they successful? The argument was it or was it not North Korea? I'm like, who cares whether or not it was North Korea? But at the same time, it kind of destroys the focus. All of a sudden, they're trying to deflect blame. And then you have a bunch of people who are sitting around, and I spoke to some CISOs, and don't worry, I turned off my phone just in case Javid tries to get back at me or something like that. But anyway, so there we are, and it's like everybody's like, and I'm sorry, now I lost my bad jokes. Damn it, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, but then I have friends at top organizations that are sitting there, and they're going along the lines, my boss won't give me any money. They're like, look at Sony. Sony has a huge budget. Yet they were able to get hacked. They're like, why should I give you any more money? Because no matter what you do, you're going to be hacked. And I'm like, that's the problem. We have to stop with this whole nonsense. But generally, the question people should be asking is, was it a sophisticated attack, or did your security just suck? And if you can't figure it out, I'm not just from the United States, I'm from New York. So anyway, you really have to figure out, did security just suck? That's an important question to ask when you're looking at these major attacks. Now, you can go down the list of things. I'm going to talk about some. It's going to seem U.S.-centric, but I'm not taking, the attacks out of, I'm primarily using attacks to highlight specific incidents. The country of origin's irrelevant. The attacks pretty much go on all the time. I keep thinking I should update the attacks, but the attacks are all the same. but at least these ways, I mean, we have attacks. Like, so for example, the presentation before me highlighted JP Morgan Chase at 75 million records. How many people have a clue about that hack? Nobody. Well, one person, the reporter in the room. And the only reason he knows about it, let me highlight this. What happened with JP Morgan Chase had 75 million credit cards hacked off a system. And instead of saying it was a sophisticated attack, it was, well, I'll talk about this in a second. It was a sophisticated attack. They're like, we screwed up. There was no multi-factor authentication on the system. It's our fault. And nobody publicized that. Was one of the largest hacks to that point in time. Nobody cared because they said it's our fault. That's a good thing. So you have to learn from that. Anyway, but then you have like the IRS, you have Ashley Madison, healthcare companies, whatever, but it's all sophisticated. Also, let me take a step. It can help you. If somebody is all of a sudden in your company excited about sophisticated attacks, you can go ahead and they could say, wow, what happened to Sony was terrible. Could we have stopped it? It's like, yes, we could stop it because I'm a really good security manager and I implemented multi-factor authentication and we would not be in the news and you would not be fired. It's like, that's how you get promoted. On the other hand, if they're like, wow, there's cyber terrorists out there, it's like, wow, yeah, there are cyber terrorists out there. I need more money or we're going to be the next victim of the cyber terrorists. Go ahead and get the money if that's how you have to get it. So anyway, you can use that. You have my blessing to be stupid. Anyway, so let's talk about one of like how many people know the Hacking Team hack? Okay, a lot of you should, because Hacking Team was, I feel like Dr. Evil, security researchers, and the security researchers, basically, they were a company in Italy, and they focused on finding zero-day vulnerabilities in products, and they sold these zero-day vulnerabilities as part of a toolkit to supposedly governments, to private companies, to police departments, and so on. And what happened was they were hacked, and there was like this whole thing going on. And the hackers were great. The hackers gave interviews. I love those hackers. So anyway, but what happened was they were going around giving interviews, but all of a sudden everybody was like, the customer list was released, and the customer list was like, oh, why is my local police department, breaking into cell phone networks? Why is this department doing this? Why is that department doing that? So there was a whole bunch of outrage. At the same time, if you're in the security profession, there were a whole bunch of zero days, especially some Microsoft zero days that got released to the internet. And there were like a whole lot of hacks that went on in the days immediately following because the hacker dumped all the zero days there. By the way, the Hacking Team's really scummy. They ironically tried to hack other systems like in Malta to plant evidence against some of their own contractors to make it look like their contractors did it. So it looked like an inside job. They're really scummy, by the way. So anyway, but the vulnerabilities had a ripple effect. Was this a zero-day attack? Ironically, this company who finds zero-day vulnerabilities was hacked at a zero-day vulnerability used on their own router. This is how they got a foothold on the network. Normally, I'd say, you get a pass for a zero-day vulnerability, except if your job is to find zero-day vulnerabilities. You don't get the pass. Then they also had the hacker gave interviews. The password for their infrastructure was password with a 0 because that was a really secure password. They had a flat network. Was this sophisticated? No way in hell was this a sophisticated attack. So anyway, that's number one. Now the IRS breach. Yes, the Internal Revenue Service, the people who collect taxes in the United States, was hacked. And what happened was at first, the news stories came out that the IRS reported that 100,000 taxpayers were compromised with 200,000 attempts. Then a couple days later, it's like, well, it wasn't 100,000 with 200,000. It was 200,000 successful attacks with 400,000 attempts. Then a few days more goes by. Well, it was 700,000 successful attacks, and they didn't even give a number, but statistically it has to be over 1 million attempts. And what happened was then the IRS commissioner came out and said, and I have the exact quote, well, you can't blame us because these were smart criminals with lots of advanced computers hiring smart people. If I worked for the IRS, I would have hunted that guy down and killed him. Because seriously, does the IRS, which has $100 million plus in IT budget, do they just say, oh, you're too smart to work for us or something like that? Oh, well, we want to buy this computer, but it costs too much. No, the IRS has it. And this guy was just trying to deflect blame instead of being fired like he should have been fired and really drawn and quartered by that point in time. But, the criminals stole $50 million in doing this. Now, how did the criminals do this? The IRS on the website has the system called Get Transcript. It's a function that allows taxpayers to download their tax record so that they can use them for various purposes. And what happened was the criminal basically used the system and gained the identity of the person by filling out the questions. I'm sure you have similar things here, but Experian, the credit reporting agency, has a service that I forgot the name of the specific service, but basically they sell a service where they go through your credit records and ask questions based on the credit record. So did you previously live at A Street, Main Street, whatever, and you pick out the right street? It's like, that's number one. Is your home mortgage from 0 to 500, 500 to 1500, or more than 1500? You guessed the right answer. Good. Move on to the next one. Then you get another one, and you get that right. But questions right out of your tax records, they make this up. This is used whenever you apply for new credit on the internet. It's used for a variety of commercial purposes. This is a legitimate authentication system that the IRS chose to use. However, was it sophisticated? No. All the criminals needed were credit reports, and they could pull these credit reports up from the dark web or anywhere else because everybody has these things. And it was just a basic commercial system. What concerns me more is how were 700,000 successful attacks go undetected for a system that barely gets used, or relatively, let's just say, doesn't get used that much. Why wasn't there any detection on the system to show there's abnormal activity? Then we have Ashley. How many people know the Ashley Madison website? Okay, if you don't know it, I don't know if that's good or bad anymore. But okay, so Ashley Madison is the dating website that is for married people to find other married people. Their moniker is "Life is Short, Have an Affair." Well, anyway, what happened was hackers broke into them and they said, "We think your site's amoral. Take your site down or we will release all the data." And they're like, "We have no morals anyway. We don't care." So what happened was the hackers ended up releasing the data. There were suicides. Apparently politicians were found on the site. There's one guy that cracks me up, this guy Duger. He was part of a TV show, 19 and Counting, where he has 19 kids with his wife. He was the only guy that ever apparently got a date on this website, because what happened was they found out, let me go through. But anyway, they released a whole bunch of sensitive internal documents, which included, ironically, their vulnerability assessments. It included emails from the security manager telling his bosses their security was insufficient and they needed more, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But anyway, it revealed also that a lot of people joined the website, because you could have a free account apparently. Then they're like, I don't want this. And then they're like, okay, if you want your data deleted, it's $19. So they would charge people $19. It became known that they did not even delete the data after charging people $19. Are there any attorneys in the room? Okay, good. So anyway, then there was then some scummy attorney crawls out of the sewer of the sewer. And after he crawled out of the sewer, then they're like, we want to have a class action lawsuit for these anonymous people who didn't get their money back or didn't get their data deleted. So luckily a judge said these anonymous people have to claim it and you can't go back into your sewers. But anyway, how was this attack accomplished? A sophisticated attack, SQL injection attacks. The way we know that was what was in the vulnerability assessments that were prepared before the attack. The criminals claim that the network was poorly segmented. They did have a better password than the elite security researchers at Hacking Team because they used pass 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of password with a 0. And they didn't delete the data, the arrogance. They did, however, improve security. And this is a real picture. I wish I photoshopped this, but I didn't. Anyway, they improved security because now you see they gave people the ability to add masks over their face. So now, once you can't tell that this is Brad Pitt now because this has a mask over the face perfectly placed. So anyway, they did improve security as a result of this hack. Now, anybody here from France? Good. Okay. So anyway, so now we have two other attacks, which I call the ISIS hacks, which is CENTCOM, TV5 Mon. So let me talk first about U.S. Central Command. U.S. Central Command is the military unit. Of course, I'm being like recorded now that I just insulted, or I will insult the French. But anyway, but U.S. Central Command is the organization that's technically fighting ISIS in the Middle East. And what happened was one day everybody woke up and the U.S. Central Command's YouTube account and Twitter account were filled with ISIS propaganda. And everybody was saying, oh my God, ISIS has hacked U.S. Central Command. What about all the classified data they got? I'm like, it's YouTube, it's Twitter. There better not be classified data on there. And then what happened was, but then there were congressional hearings about, gee, if ISIS could do this, what else could ISIS do? I'm like, they didn't have multi-factor authentication on their stupid systems. They couldn't have done much else. But still, then in France, you had TV5 Monde. TV5 Monde is a major television network of France, and they own several stations. And one engineer all of a sudden saw their computers start doing really bad things, and he literally pulled the plug. That guy is the smartest person in the security industry I've ever heard of. Really, that's not sarcastic. But anyway, he pulled the plug, and all of a sudden, the whole network ended up going down for several days. French politicians held hearings, said it was an attack against free speech. Like they took down TV5 Monde. You could say they did the world a service. But either way, everybody was there. And they're like, well, maybe this was Russia and stuff like that. You know what? I don't care whether it was Russia, ISIS, or some 400-pound teenager in their basement. Because you know how they got access to this? They put this guy on TV behind a wall, which had the passwords listed on the wall behind him. I'm not making that up. So it doesn't matter how they got who it was, because they put their passwords on TV. Anyway, don't put your passwords on TV if you learn nothing else. Next, Anthem. This is a U.S.-based attack. Again, another one highlighted by the person before me. 80 million plus healthcare records were compromised, and this became important. And like it was the largest breach of the type. It was perpetrated by China. We know that because there's deep panda software, and we know pandas are from China, so therefore it's a Chinese attack. But you know, this attack actually had a lot of critical things. I can't go into the implications of it, but was it a sophisticated attack? Again, it's a watering hole attack. I don't have time. I'll talk to you later about that. Compromise admin credentials. But here's the most important thing. This attack went undetected for 9 months with massive querying of data, massive downloading of data, and the bad people on their network for more than 9 months. Anyway, the commonalities: improperly segmented networks, detection deficit disorder. Actually, I give Ari credit for the term detection deficit disorder, because everybody thinks like, you know, I have another slide on this, but everybody thinks that attention, I know, put that down. Anyway, everybody thinks that attention deficit disorder is about people who can't pay attention. If you actually know people who have it, the problem is that some people have one type where they can focus too much on the wrong thing. Some people are looking never at the right thing. There's a whole bunch of different versions of it. But anyway, so there's a whole bunch of that. No whitelisting, poor awareness, no multi-factor authentication, and whatever. So now preventing the IRS attack. Here's the thing. I don't think that how the IRS was hacked really was a failure of protection. It was a failure of detection and reaction. The problem with the IRS, it was a viable commercial authentication system that they were using. That wasn't the problem. The problem was they went undetected despite the fact they had a spike of activity, a whole bunch of failed activity, and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to focus on that later. Anyway, I mentioned the IRARI rules of sophisticated attacks. You shouldn't have, and you can read it. It's basically good cyber hygiene. Your system should not be hacked because they didn't have the appropriate patches. It shouldn't be the result of a phishing message. Shouldn't be, passwords shouldn't be hard coded onto the system. Passwords shouldn't be put on TV, or so on. And now I really do have to say, don't put your passwords on TV. They do make the rounds. And I also have to really say, don't put your passwords on TV. This was in the Hawaii Emergency Management System when there was that fake missile alert from North Korea that somehow got, and they literally had their password on TV there as well. So anyway, don't put your passwords on TV. Now let's talk about the term advanced persistent threat. I prefer to use the word adaptive persistent threat. I don't have time to go into a good case study, but here's the thing. You mentioned the Target hack before. The Target hack, everybody says it was an HVAC vendor. I'm like, it wasn't they didn't hack their air conditioning, which is the impression people got. They hacked the vendor, got credentials to get on the vendor network, just basic submit invoices or whatever. And then what happened was, then they jumped from the vendor network, they found a hole into the business network. Then they found the configuration management system that pushes out updates to all the point of sale systems, and that's how they started stealing credit cards. Then they also created exfiltration servers, which is another set of servers that they hacked so that they stored all the credit cards as they were capturing them, and then at another point in time, they transferred them out. Was that advanced? I don't know if it was advanced. Were they a threat? Did they intend to do harm? Yes. Were they persistent? In other words, I doubt their first attack was just trying to get passwords from an air conditioner vendor. They probably tried a lot of ways and eventually got in. They were persistent. They didn't stop when they failed, when there was a failed password. But they were more adaptive. They went from one attack to another attack, to one technology to another technology. Because if you label people advanced, it means they're unstoppable. They're not unstoppable. They're just adaptive. They expect failure, and I'll talk about that along the way. And that's what makes them adaptive. APT assumes failure. I worked with CIA operatives, NSA people. I worked with Navy SEALs and a whole bunch of other things. Here's the thing. Everybody who's an attacker assumes failure. They never, well, anybody who's good assumes failure. They never assume they're going to get in on the first try. They always assume that somebody's going to potentially be looking for them. They always assume somebody's going to potentially stop them. So they are always on the lookout for what is the next step they have to take. And that's the problem. When you see somebody who's been like arrested a lot, you know they're not good. When somebody is really focused and gets in and gets out, you don't even know the attack occurred. Those are people who probably failed hundreds of times until they accomplished their goal, but they did it avoiding detection. Rob Joyce, who's involved in the, at the time he was chief of NSA's Tailored Access Office. This is the group of elite hackers at NSA. He was once asked when he gave a presentation, what about all the 0 days NSA has? He goes, the 0 days are irrelevant. You know, they could go away next day. It's our persistence and focus that gets us in. And that's the most critical part. Advanced attackers are persistent and focused, and that's what you have to deal with. So now advanced persistent security, yes, the title of my book, by my book. But anyway, you have to fight, you know, really any security with your own adaptive security programs. I would have loved to call it adaptive persistent security, but, you know, that's not the buzzword we had to play with at the time. But anyway, your security programs have to be adaptive. You have to assume failure. And the bottom bullet is the most important of the, well, second most important of the whole presentation. You have, your purpose of your security program is not to stop bad guys from getting in. Your purpose of your security program is to stop bad guys from getting out. You have to stop the bad guys from achieving their goal, because there's no such thing as perfect security. And if anybody ever tells you they're perfect security, they're a fool or a liar. Somebody will always get in. Your job is to stop them from getting out. Risk management implies, you know, how many people here are security professionals quickly? Okay, you're all failures, because the definition of security is being free from risk. You're never going to be free from risk. There will always be risk. Your job is risk management. You're not going to stop everything. You have to stop what you can in a cost-effective way. Now, here's the thing. For optimizing risk as opposed to minimizing risk, and this is a critical concept, if you have no security in place, your vulnerabilities are at a maximum, everything below the line represents a potential loss. As you start to implement countermeasures, your potential loss should start going down, because security is kind of like the 80-20 rule, except it's like 95-5. You can stop 95% of the problem with 5% of the effort. Basic cyber hygiene can stop a significant part of the problem. So everybody says, okay, so I want to get down here where my loss is almost zero. I'm like, no, because at some point it's a waste in time. The countermeasures are going to cost more than your potential loss. So they're like, so do I want to go here, like where it hits? I'm like, no. You're never going to experience like a loss of the same amount you want to spend. That means you're a net neutral. What you want to do is you want to figure out what is the loss you're willing to live with, and then what's the cost of the program to get you there. Unfortunately, most security people get the budgets they deserve, not the budgets that they need. You know, they get the budgets they deserve because they don't know how to make a business case. And how you make a business case is, and I'm just trying, this is just a quick summary. I can't do it at the macro level, but the micro level, let's say you know that if you implement multi-factor authentication, you're going to stop 20 million pounds of loss or 20 million euros of loss. It's like, what does multi-factor authentication cost? Maybe $500,000. And so then you go to your management. It's like, okay, I need €500,000 to stop 20 million in loss. They're like, I don't have €500,000. I'm like, okay, well, here, sign here that you don't want to stop $20 million in loss and significantly less than it's going to cost, and I'll be on my way. You got to make the business case to get what you want, because otherwise you're wasting your time and money, and you're wasting, and you'll get the budget you deserve, not what you need. Learn to deserve more. Anyway, proaction. Design a program that expects failure. Design a program that expects the bad guys at some point in time are going to be in your network. That's a given. And you got to implement the appropriate countermeasures to proactively, frankly, try to stop them from getting in, but implement the proactive measures to detect when they get in and then to react appropriately. Because NotPetya was a great example of a bunch of people who didn't know how to protect, and they had no capability to detect and react quick enough. And then with NotPetya, some people are like, oh, it's okay, I've got backups. They never tested their backups, and their network was still ruined because they never had a good reaction capability in place. So anyway, back from my days working with the Pentagon, with defensive information warfare, again, just a nice, well, kind of dull slide, but good security is about protection, detection, and reaction. At the time it was called defensive information warfare. Now it's cyber network defense. Either way, this is what we call security. Protection, detection, and reaction. To implement protection, understand what's there of value. You don't want to buy protection tools just because they're a buzzword. You want to buy protection because it's going to provide a return on investment. You know what the bad guys are going to target. You know what's going to potentially stop them cost effectively. You don't need to stop bad guys from getting into unimportant systems. You need to primarily stop bad guys from getting into the critical systems and then stealing your stuff. And also remember, your employees, even well-meaning ones, are the bad guys as well. So you got to figure out how to stop them from causing harm. And then I'll talk about culture really quickly later. But detection. Understand that the bad guys will get in. Detect in the right place. Equifax was mentioned. It doesn't matter what happened, how they got in. The critical issue with Equifax was that even after they were in the network for 6 weeks, and then they were exfiltrating data for 6 weeks. That's the bigger problem. Why were they able to do that for 12 weeks and go undetected on their most critical data? It doesn't matter how they got in. It matters that they went undetected for 12 weeks. Then reaction. Reaction has to be built into everything, and make sure that reaction is critical and you know that it's tested appropriately and it's geared to stop bad guys from getting out. It also has feedback into protection. Too many people spend all their money on protection, and then something happens and it's like, well, the bad guys got out, but now we don't have any money to implement more proactive measures to stop them from getting in again, and that's bad. Culture. Here's the thing about culture. Everybody talks about awareness, and I don't have time for this, but basically understand that the right culture is that you don't need a good security awareness program. Because what a good security awareness program is you walk into a new employee walks into the organization and they see how everybody behaves, and they behave exactly like them. And if they misbehave, everybody corrects them. So for example, when I was walking around NSA without a badge when I worked there, people would stop me in the hall. My coworker once hid my badge while a security guard was trying to arrest me. That's the thing. I never forgot my badge again. That's the type of what you really want from your awareness program. Conclusions: the attackers aren't successful because they're advanced or sophisticated. They're successful because they're adaptive and persistent, and that's what you've got to plan for. Your goal is to stop the bad guys from getting out. Your goal is also to buy my book. And then the next slide is just kind of a bit. Sorry, this is Jeb Bush. That was him being really pathetic, saying please clap, because nobody clapped when he was done. Anyway, that's my presentation. I think I'm out of time. Thanks.